I didn't quite expect to join at such a tumultuous time when it comes to the aid sector.
Like, what do you think it is about that time that has led to this time? That's a very personal example of a sort of great leader in your life.
She was always incredibly kind, and I just think that's such a role model for leadership.
How do you sort of seek and receive honest, useful feedback?
There's something around really valuing diversity of perspective and difference and opinion. I always try to never assume bad intent as well.
You know, as soon as you don't feel psychological safety, it's horrible.
Our mandate is to reach people living in extreme poverty wherever they are in the world, and that's often the most fragile and conflict-affected countries, and that's often the worst parts of those conflict-affected and fragile countries. We've just gone into Yemen in 2024, and it's a huge humanitarian crisis there with 18 million people in need of humanitarian assistance and 5 million children severely malnourished. Why might you flee your home if you are fleeing from Sudan? Why might you try to seek asylum in a different country? What does it mean to protect the planet? What does it mean to counter misinformation? Girls are 3 times less likely to get an education than boys.
How do you feel about the future and in terms of the landscape that not only concern but lots of organisations who are focused on humanitarian, long-term development work in all areas of the world are now facing?
The fact that 1 in 5 children are growing up in a conflict zone, I think, is unconscionable. International humanitarian law gets flouted kind of regularly every single day, be that in Sudan, be that in Gaza. You know, the culture of impunity that we are allowing, that governments are allowing, is beyond belief. This is not a time to retreat from your aid commitment. This is a time for more compassion and kindness. And I think what's so tragic about the aid cuts decision is we're actually making progress. There's 1 billion people that have been lifted out of poverty in the past 30 years. You know, child mortality's halved since 1990. Maternal mortality is massively decreased. A lot of people care about the future.
Sayyeda, welcome to Causes. Give us an introduction to who you are and sort of 1 minute intro to how you've ended up as the Exec Director of Concern Worldwide UK.
Thank you, Dave, and thanks for having me on. It's really great to be here. So my name's Sayyeda Salam. I am the Executive Director, as you say, of Concern Worldwide UK. I've been in my post for about 8 months now. I joined in September last year. I didn't quite expect to join at such a tumultuous time when it comes to the aid sector. But there's lots that I took from my previous roles at Save the Children, both Save the Children UK and Save the Children International, where I'd been for the previous 15 and a half years. And I suppose what got me here is just always a deep belief in doing whatever I can within my personal agency to advance sustainable development goals, to advance rights. And my time at Save the Children was obviously marked by my commitment to child rights, and my time at Concern marked by similar, but also just a deep belief in how Concern operates and how Concern puts communities themselves at the heart of decision making and really asks communities what it is that they need and want from an international NGO and programmes subsequently. So that was what really drew me to Concern after a very, very happy time at Save the Children.
15 years is, a good amount of time in a single organisation. You've done a bunch within Save the Children, various areas. How did you decide it was time to, what was the sort of reasons for wanting to move to Concern? Was it the role, or was it you were sort of looking for something new?
It was definitely the role. I mean, it took a lot to get me to lead Save the Children. I loved Save the Children. And as you say, I did lots of different roles within Save the Children. So even though I was there 15 years, I felt like I kept quite sort of fresh within it. But it was really Concern. And I think, as I say, the respect that a lot of my colleagues, who I had a high respect for, a lot of my technical colleagues, that they had for Concern and the quality of our programmes. And as I say, just that community-driven approach was something that I thought was really stand out actually in sector. And when the role came up, I sort of didn't think I would get it necessarily, and was really delighted when I did. And the past 8 months have just been marked by working with just extraordinary people and kind of seeing the best of concern in many ways as well.
Can you talk to me a bit about your sort of childhood upbringing, all of that stuff? Like, what do you think it is about that time that has led to this time?
I think probably, as with many people, my parents were a huge influence on me. So my dad left India the night before partition in 1947 and came over to the UK to study on a scholarship and ended up becoming a quite illustrious physicist, actually. He worked in theoretical physics. And the thing that always struck me about his story was, one, that he was very lucky. So the other 5 people that won the scholarship ended up in partition violence and never made it to study. And two, that as the eldest son of 7 brothers and 1 sister, he had opportunities that his sister didn't. So she never went to school. And so I've always, I suppose, taken that through my life, being very, very grateful for my education and the opportunities that I've had as a woman, as a girl, and thought about how I could play my part in changing that reality for girls around the world. I think girls are 3 times less likely to get an education than boys. And I think it's the World Economic Forum that said that it's going to take 131 years to close the gender gap. So, that sort of sense of actually how do you create equal opportunities, and what could it have been for his sister had she had the same opportunities? And then the biggest influence, I guess, in my childhood was my mother. So my mother was just an extraordinary woman. She was also a scientist. She was a molecular biophysicist. She raised 2 children, myself and my brother, and she cared for my father when he became sick when I was quite young. And I just don't know how she did it, because since she's died, so many people have come to me and said, your mother really had an impact on my career. She really encouraged me, particularly women, into science. She really pushed me to apply for roles I wouldn't have thought I could apply for. And she was always incredibly kind. And I just think that's such a role model for leadership. So I think undoubtedly she had a huge influence on me, and an influence on how I thought about balancing career with being a working mum. I've got 2 little ones. So just thinking through, like, I wish I could ask her. She died 12 years ago, but I wish I could ask her, Mum, how did you do it? But she did do it, and that was just a real big inspiration to me. So I think that kind of thread of being a working mum, being a working carer, supporting other people, and also just that value on education and, what it means to make sure that everyone gets the chances that they have the rights to, sort of been the thread of my career.
That's a very personal example of a sort of great leader in your life. What do you think? Like, and use your parents as an example if you want to. But what do you think makes a good leader? And I also want to follow that up with sort of what kind of leader do you aspire to be?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been really lucky, I think, through my career to have worked with some really, really, really great leaders. And I guess if I could distill it and think about what kind of leader I want to be, I guess firstly, there's something around really valuing diversity of perspective and difference and opinion,
Mhm.
and trying to avoid groupthink, and creating the psychological space that people feel safe to disagree, or safe to try something and fail. And that's something that I've seen some really great leaders do. And I know for myself personally, one of my former roles, I was lucky actually. I got to set up a team, and we had team members in Jordan, in Egypt, in Bahrain, in UAE, in London, in the UK. And it was like, again, how can you really get such richness of perspectives, of geography, of thought, of opinion when we're all scattered across the world? And that's where, technology, fortunately, post COVID has really helped, I think. But yeah, the greatest leaders I've seen have really managed to challenge themselves and not be afraid to say, I was wrong, or, to be challenged. So I think that's really important. And that gets harder, I think, the higher up you get, like more and more people will possibly tell you what you want to hear. So it's,
This
yeah.
comes up. This has come up a lot. So yeah. So w- if it gets harder, if it's easier for people to say what they think you might want to hear, how do you sort of seek and receive honest, useful feedback?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wouldn't pretend to get it right. I think one of the things that I've tried to do is sort of signal what I might be working on. So to say, can I just grab 5 minutes because I was just working on doing this in a meeting and did that come across? Or, so I think kind of seeking feedback in the moment is quite important. Obviously, if you're ready to receive it, there's times when you're just not in that place. And that's also okay too, to say, I want to have this conversation, but it's probably best if, we sleep on it and come to it fresh. I always try to like never assume bad intent as well. So it's always people are coming with good intent, and it's feedback can be sort of a rich thing around how you can get better and improve. It should never be sort of something that makes someone feel torn down or anything like that. So I think role modeling, asking for feedback is helpful. And then yeah, I think psychological safety. There's loads of research around it. I think it's a daily thing you have to do to try to create psychological safety. But yeah, let me know if you found someone that's got it right, Dave, because I don't think anyone has.
I mean, we've probably all been around, yeah, examples where it's like really good, examples where as soon as you don't feel psychological safety, it's horrible. So it's such a crucial thing for yeah, for teams. We'll get back into sort of leadership stuff, but for people who, we'll start with the organisation that you're in now. Like, for people who aren't aware, just give us a rundown of Concern Worldwide UK and what it does, what it's here to do.
Yeah, of course. So Concern Worldwide was founded about 60 years ago, 1968, and our mandate is to reach people living in extreme poverty wherever they are in the world. And that's often the most fragile and conflict affected countries. And that's often the worst parts of those affected and fragile countries. So last year we reached 27 million people across 25 different countries. And the way we work, as I said before, is really putting the community at the heart of what we do. So it is both emergency response and long-term development for people that are in sector. We are dual mandate. But in that emergency response, we'll be asking people, what do you need? We'll do that in immediate life-saving support, whether that's food, medical kits, cash transfer, psychosocial support. And then we'll also do the sort of longer term rebuilding homes, rebuilding livelihoods, helping communities become more resilient to future shocks. And then our long term development will help communities work to better access food, better access livelihoods, better access health and education support through through livelihoods work, through income generating activities, setting up a small business, through growing nutritious food. So that's kind of our aim, is really to create that sustainability. Often the nature of where we work means that we will stay there for a really long time. So DRC, for example, we're in um, large parts of DRC in the east. We're in the Central African Republic. We've just gone into Yemen in 2024. Obviously, huge humanitarian crisis there with 18 million people in need of humanitarian assistance and 5 million children severely malnourished. And we've been working through health clinics on food and nutrition support, as well as working on clean water and sanitation to prevent, well, and to treat cholera, along with hygiene kits. I think Yemen has 35% of the world's cholera cases. So huge, huge needs there. But it also means we will leave countries as well when we are no longer needed. And there is that sort of resilience and sustainability in communities. So, for example, Uganda and Zambia, we are no longer in. And it's interesting, actually, we've got this amazing board member, Dr. Hassan Rover, who's on my board and the board of Concern UK. And he talks about, he grew up in pastoralist Kenya and he came across Concern when he was growing up. And he said, what I loved about Concern was that you work with rather than for. You go into a community and you work with people and you treat people with dignity and respect. And he said, this is why I joined your board. And, I had lots of choice, but I wanted to join Concern Worldwide's board. So that was really special feedback, I think, to hear from one of your board when you join a new organisation.
Yeah. So speaking of joining, and so what you've described in terms of concern, there's a lot going on. There's lots of places, lots of staff, lots of partners, lots. You're 8 months in. What was the journey sort of, you sort of pick up a fluency of how an organization works, and I think it sort of takes a while. So I imagine after 15 years at Save, you're very much fluent in Save, how, you know, the moving parts, the sort of jigsaw piece that every jigsaw puzzle that every organization has. What when you entered sort of Concern, what are the steps that you take to sort of learn about all those moving parts, to sort of expedite the process of understanding, because you're in a role where you have to quite quickly understand? Um,
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's something that, any new CEO or executive director has to get to grips really quite quickly. And I set myself not wanting to go down management speak, but like a 90-day plan. And that
mhm,
involved really actively listening for what it was that made Concern unique and sort of casting my net quite wide. So making sure I had time with my team, making sure that I had time with our global staff, making sure I had time with my trustees, but also kind of more unusual things. Like I went out with our face-to-face team on the street and heard how they talk to the public about our work, and that was a great learning experience. I got out to our shops in Northern Ireland and met with our volunteers and heard about how much Concern means to them and the difference that it's made to their lives. I went to see one of our debates programs. So we run this global citizenship program across all of Ireland, and that's in about, I think, over 300 schools, reaching about 11,000 primary and secondary school kids. And it really teaches them, why might you flee your home if you are fleeing from Sudan? Why might you try to seek asylum in a different country? Um, what does it mean to protect the planet? What does it mean to create sustainability? What does it mean to counter misinformation? You see a photo in a newspaper and, that might not be telling you the whole story. So just really kind of inspiring, like how to think, how to question, how to debate, and then the school children will debate one another. So they get these amazing life skills. And it's just such an incredible program because I think it really does counter a lot of kind of quite scary rhetoric that we see in schools at the moment.
mhm.
So I absolutely love this program. So I'd say those first 90 days, like really listening, really taking in what it was that made Concern so special, talking to as many people as I could, trying to find people that didn't like Concern, which was actually quite hard to find. But yeah, trying to find
How
people
do you
that
go
didn't
about
agree
finding them? Where do you start? Where do you begin?
Oh, good question. Well, I think being out face to face with the
Hmm.
teams, they have a lot of resilience. They're out there all day in the cold and the wet, and often someone will either just completely ignore them or, come up to them and say, "What's the point of you? What's the point of international aid? How can I make a
Hmm.
difference?" All the kind of misconceptions people have around charities. So it's good to hear that side as well, and to kind of work through how you might counter that. So it was a good 90 days. And then what I've done since is sort of play back to the team what I've heard as well. So play back all these amazing things and then play back sort of areas where I think we could probably accelerate our impact
Hmm.
and, what is our unique role in this sort of wider infrastructure and how can we do that?
How important is organizational culture for you in terms of making that vision possible? Like, how, of the sort of the leadership pie chart, like how much value or weight, I suppose, do you put on organizational culture?
Yeah, I think it's key. It goes throughout everything that you do, organizational culture. Your team is how you deliver what you deliver, taking care of people's well-being, encouraging people to take care of their own well-being, making sure you've got diverse and um, different perspectives and opinions represented, as I say, I think it's absolutely critical. At Concern, we have three strategic goals, and organisational culture is one of the three, but I would say it goes beyond that because it feeds into the other two strategic goals as well. Um, So I think it's absolutely critical. And for me, what I always try to say to my teams is it's about a culture of impact. So I'll say this more around flexible working and taking care of yourself. Like I'd much rather you come in, you have this big goal, you're working backwards from that goal, and you're thinking about activities that will drive that goal. And if you've achieved that in a day, don't clock watch, don't work all hours, like come in, have the biggest impact that you can, and then go and do something lovely for yourself. And that's like very much kind of how I work and what I'd like to drive. It's how much impact am I having today and thinking through what will drive that? I guess it's like, again, using management speak, the OKR methodology, objective and key results, rather than the KPIs, because the KPIs might not always drive the impact that you're trying to have.
What is impact for you?
Yeah, no, I was going to bring it into a bit of a practical because it sounds a bit random or ethereal if you just chat about impact. I mean, impact ultimately is impact for the communities that we work with. That's our ultimate impact is, are we delivering great programming? Are we supporting people to create sustainable livelihoods and to be able to lift themselves out of poverty? That's the ultimate impact. In terms of what we do in the UK, which is fundraising and influencing predominantly, it's things like, okay, is it that we want to raise as much money as possible, or do we want to think about how impactful that money is when it's spent? So there's sort of questions that you can ask yourself around that. Is it that we're aiming for the largest number of supporters, no matter what the cost, or are we looking at net, or are we looking at how engaged our supporters are and, how close they feel to us, or, what kind of actions they're taking for us as well. So it kind of just gets you to think, I think, in a little bit of a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the trick is to kind of really marry that up with ambition, because you do want to be ambitious, like, and not for yourself, but for the communities that you're serving and the change you're trying to make. So it is really important to be ambitious, but it's also important, as I said earlier, to create freedom to fail, and also to create psychological safety if you might be pursuing the wrong thing or pursuing the wrong sort of impact definition as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if you start from impact, I think it helps frame kind of everything that you do.
I suppose I'm really curious to ask about difficult decisions and how you approach making difficult decisions, especially in light of sort of the budgets are tight, all of that stuff. Like, can you talk about your sort of thinking on how you make difficult decisions, how you prioritize, um, potentially when there's no good answer to it.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And I think you've got to have a degree of discipline to make sure that you're making decisions consistently and fairly,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they're difficult. I think it's really important you can stand by a decision and the input and data that you took to take that decision and how you made it. It might be the wrong decision, but I think getting those steps right is really important. I also think there's something around, I guess, going back to the heart of what you do. So we had this amazing talk last week by Henry Rowling of Flying Cars. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you've ever met him, but he was talking to us about disruption, particularly at a time like this when, as you say, all traditional sources of funding are getting slashed. And how does the sector look at disruption? And he was talking about two examples of companies actually that had survived falling profits and um, sort of disrupted themselves by staying true to who they were. And they were The Guardian with their subscription model to promote free and fair journalism, and Lego, who sort of went back to what they did really well and sold off their theme parks. So this is a very sort of top level. Like, I'm sure there's way more within those different case studies that we could talk to, but just bringing it back to decision making and concern, it's very much like, are we staying true to who we are? And I think that's best summed up by our founder, who said, do as much as you can for as many as you can, as well as you can for as long as you can. And that's really helped, I think, inform decision making with recent cut. How can we keep our programs going for as long as we can, as well as we can, for as many as we can, despite all kind of difficulties? So just going back to that coreness of who you are, I think helps when decisions are difficult and you're dealing with unknowns and you don't know if you're going to receive funding, you don't know like what road lies ahead. So I think there's something about those two things, using data, but also using kind of heart and cause and really making sure that what you're doing supports that. And I think there's a third thing as well, which is ultimately you are a decision maker, but it is important to have people that will tell you or give different perspectives on things. So you don't have groupthink and you don't always think the same.
The landscape that we're in, that we've sort of the sector, the international development sector, has found itself in the last 6 months with geopolitical stuff. Like, how do you feel about the future and in terms of the landscape that not only concern but lots of organisations who are focused on humanitarian long-term development work in all areas of the world are now facing?
Yeah, I think we're living in a really, really, really difficult time, and it would be very remiss to say otherwise. I mean,
Mm.
if you look at, just one statistic, the Global Humanitarian Overview, which has 305 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, the UN's appealed for 47 billion to reach just half of that number, and that's only 7% funded as of March. And to put 47 billion into perspective, that's less than 2% of global military expenditure. There's something very wrong in the world at the moment where we're putting so many people's lives at risks due to things that could be prevented, one of which is conflict and one of which is climate change. And the fact that 1 in 5 children are growing up in a conflict zone, I think, is unconscionable. It's absolutely unconscionable. And the fact that international humanitarian law gets flouted kind of regularly every single day, be that in Sudan, be that in Gaza, the culture of impunity that we are allowing, that governments are allowing, is beyond belief. So I do feel like this is not a time to retreat from your aid commitment. This is a time for more compassion and kindness, not a time for decisions that will have very brutal and very deadly consequences. And we have said that in light of the UK government aid cuts to 0.3 by 2027. So I guess the question is what do we do about it?
Mm.
Because you can't just turn around and give up, because that's not who we are and what we do. And I think what's so tragic about the aid cuts decision is we're actually making progress, as society, as the world. There's 1 billion people that have been lifted out of poverty in the past 30 years. Child mortality's halved since 1990. Maternal mortality is like massively decreased. I think about myself and my eldest son, like we would almost certainly not be here today had it not been for the care that I received when I was having my eldest. It's not a given that women will die in childbirth and children won't survive beyond their first birthday. Like, change is possible. And so I think it's how do you refuse to sort of accept the world the way it is, and how do you mobilize? Because I know a lot of people out there care, and know a lot of people care about the future. So it's how do we come together? And one of the things I really love about my role at Concern is I'm also on the board of the Disasters Emergency Committee. And I think that's such a brilliant way for a coalition of organisations to come together to do what they do really well. So, Age International working on age-related issues, and Save the Children working on children-related issues, and Concern with our holistic kind of community approach. Like, it's brilliant to have all of that expertise under one umbrella and sort of not force the public to choose between us. So
Mm-hmm.
it's, when a disaster strikes, we're out there straight away. The public mechanisms kick in, people give their funding, and they know that that is being really well spent, and we'll report back on that. And I just think that's a great mechanism for keeping UK public engaged with stories of progress and stories of hope, even when times feel really bleak.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is, so your time at Save and other other roles, you've picked up this like a smorgasbord of skills. I suppose when I looked at the different areas you'd worked at in Save, as sort of looking at it, thinking, was this intentional because it sets you up to really lead an organization because you've had time in these pockets. Has so my getting to the question. His question is, was that sort of strategic, intentional? Was that sort of accidental? Have you always wanted to sort of be a leader, or is that sort of you fallen into leadership roles?
Gosh, I don't know, Dave. It wasn't by design, I can say that. But I would say, like, I'm a big believer in, like, you go where your kind of energy takes you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you love to do. And I love talking to people. I love forming relationships. And that worked really well for a partnerships role. It worked really well, I'd say, when I worked in humanitarian advocacy. I also really like kind of startup innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So that worked really well when I set up a particular initiative at Save the Children for new forms of partnership. So yeah, it's definitely not been by design, but I guess if anyone's listening that's thinking about going into sector or just more generally about like your future career, like definitely go where your energy takes you, but also don't be lazy, like learn what you aren't good at as well. That's really important too. So, I have to consciously be like, yeah, I need to spend time on that because that's not my area of expertise, so I need to learn about that. So having that learning mindset, that growth mindset, I think is
Hmm.
really important. But no, sorry, I wish I could tell you it was like a perfectly planned, life plan, but it really wasn't. And I think in many ways, I worked with wonderful people and worked for an amazing organisation where there were those opportunities to move around as well.
Hmm. Yeah, amazing. You talked about startup within Save. Concern is pretty big.
Yeah.
Save is pretty big. How do you view those sort of that each side of that scale, sort of small, scrappy versus big, bit of a beast when it comes to leading?
Yeah. I mean, my very first role was set up a UK charity. And again, like you're doing everything from
Hmm.
taking out the bins, filling in the spreadsheet. And I think it gives you a real appreciation for what your team are going through when you've done it yourself.
Hmm.
It's like, that's going to take time. And I know that's going to take time because I've done it. So I think that's really important in terms of when you're in a bigger organization. I love the impact you can have through a bigger organization, through the advocacy that you can have, through the impact you can have on people's lives, through the systems, the processes that are set up. I think that's really, really important.
Hmm.
When you think of all the behind the scenes work that goes into making programs safe, that, goes into making sure that programs deliver against what they're meant to deliver against. I think all of that can't really get underestimated.
Hmm.
So I suppose it's a bit of both. So to totally not answer your question, I think you can innovate within a bigger organization too, and that doesn't have to be like grandiose. It can just be smaller things every day. Should we try this? Great, let's try it.
Hmm.
It's kind of having that constant like, how do we push ourselves to do better without, I guess, throwing out what's brilliant as well.
Hmm.
So you don't want to kind of come into an organization and be like, no, we're going to change everything. You want to look for what's absolutely brilliant and build on it. And that's what I tried to do with my 90-day plan.
Amazing. And looking back on the 90-day plan, because you must be on a bad day, 100
I've lost track.
195.
Good math.
100. Do you feel like, so now you've had 100 days to look back on the 90-day plan? Do you feel that you were successful in executing on the plan?
Oh no, I think I'm gonna have to come back on your show in a bit more time and let you know. I mean, I definitely did not expect the kind of volatility that we had since the start of the year. I mean, I did expect it, but not this quickly.
Hmm.
And that's definitely meant that we've had to like really take a hard look at like, what do we stop, what do we start, what do we continue.
Hmm.
And we are in a strategy development phase as well as concern, beyond 2025. So I think there's a lot that still needs to be done to deliver on our mission and our purpose. But I also think, yeah, I feel very settled at Concern, and that's, I think, thanks to all the people that have just welcomed me and kind of been open and generous with their time and advice and thoughts. So hopefully we can continue to create impact.
What I want to do now is well, for everybody, just leave a sort of space at the end. If there's anything we haven't spoken about that you'd like to sort of say.
I think there is so much to be fighting for right now, and don't give up if you're in the sector or if you're outside the sector. And let's work together through these partnerships, unusual coalitions, to try to kind of, I guess, to quote Gandhi, to be the change that we want to see in the world.